Hail Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. We probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another installment of Dork Tales. Woo! Tales of personal dorkdom from me to you. And today's installment is a little different in that it's not as outright silly as previous segments. But it's a worthy Dork Tales entry because it's about my family. It's absolutely true. And the story is so bonkers, it deserves its own video. Today's tale is about one of my grandfathers, Grandpa Rice. Grandpa Rice was a Lutheran minister, but during World War II, he was an Army chaplain. Served in the 101st Airborne during D-Day. His glider was shot down over France, but he survived that encounter and the subsequent Battle of the Bulge. In fact, when my dad went to visit the Battle of the Bulge historic site in Bastogne, the black and white film strip they play as part of the tour, it's got Grandpa Rice in it. I've got a bunch of Grandpa Rice stories from World War II, and most of them are the war is hell type stories. But there's one story that stands out. It's crazy, it's fantastical, and when you hear it, you're gonna say, that can't be true. It's true! And the reason I know it's true is because I have it in his own words. A first-hand account. In the 70s, Grandpa Rice was interviewed by the Lutheran Council of America as part of their oral history archives. And I've got the transcript. And the centerpiece of that interview is the story I'm about to tell you. So, buckle up. Okay, I told you that Grandpa Rice was at the Battle of the Bulge. That was 1944. This story takes place 2 years earlier. The war is in full effect, and Grandpa is stationed in the Aleutian Islands, with no idea that he's going to be gliding into France in a few years. He's assigned to a remote army base called Fort Randall in Cold Bay, Alaska. I Googled it. Spoiler alert, it's still remote. The nearest town of note is Anchorage, where my wife was born, which is almost 1,000 miles away. And you know, if the locals call it Cold Bay, that means it's cold. In his interview, Grandpa described Cold Bay. He uses the term muskeg. I had to look it up. It means bog or swamp. It seemed to me like it's 1,000,000 miles from nowhere, and there's nothing there. No trees, no shrubs, no docks, no roads, no trails except bear trails. In the wintertime, there's maybe 26 to 30 feet of snow. And in the summertime, all that snow, it's a short summer, but all that snow melts and the muskeg is bottomless. If you get off the tundra into some of these muskegs, you could drop out of sight and no one would find you for years, if they find you at all. Good. Sounds like a horrorscape, but okay. You'll be shocked to learn that the weather in Cold Bay is terrible. And in one of the region's ubiquitous storms, a transport plane carrying a bunch of pilots returning from an R&R, rest and relaxation trip to Anchorage, tragically crashes into the sea. And the bodies wash ashore in an even more remote location. More remote than Cold Bay. Grandpa Rice picks up the story. Some of the pilots wondered whether there was something that couldn't be done. So I asked for permission to give them a Christian burial, and it was granted. So the shortest way to get there is by sea. Grandpa and 2 local guides, a father and son team, son's name is Billy Buck, take a tugboat out into the Bering Sea to get to these bodies. Quote, "We had to anchor almost half-mile out because of the reefs, and we didn't have good charts of that particular area. We put a dory over the side of the tugboat and began to row in." A dory's a small boat. "And we got about 1/4 of a mile, maybe closer to shore, and a large wave came in and capsized the dory. And we swam and walked ashore as best we could." Okay, so, boat is capsized. Grandpa and his guides are trying desperately not to drown. The tugboat captain sees the little boat flip over, scans the water, can't see Grandpa or Billy Buck, so he radios it in, saying he saw the boat overturn and he doubts that there are any survivors. But to Cold Bay's credit, they send an aircraft to fly over the beach for a look-see. Grandpa Rice. Well, this man buzzed the beach. And of course, I wore a peculiar type of parka, a different color than the regular military one. I did this for precaution and safety reasons because I visited the outpost and I didn't want anybody shooting at me, mistaking me for somebody else. He saw me lying on the beach and I couldn't even raise a finger. I saw him go over. He buzzed twice. And the men with me, we just couldn't. We were so exhausted, we just couldn't do anything. So he got back to Cold Bay and he said, Chaplain Rice and the 2 men with him, their bodies are washed up among the bodies on the beach, and there appears to be no sign of life. So they're declared dead, left in the middle of nowhere. And at that point, a brutal storm, regionally known as a willy-waw, breaks out, featuring 150-mile-an-hour winds, and the storm lasts for 12 days. So any type of air or sea travel is completely out of the question for 2 weeks. Now the situation seems pretty hopeless. I can only assume Grandpa must have been pretty despondent at this point. But luckily, Billy Buck and his dad are trappers, and they know where the trapper cabins are. The local trappers set up, quote, cabins every 10 miles or so. And by cabin, I don't mean double glazed windows and a gas fireplace. These are essentially holes in the ground, but they do contain supplies. Grandpa. So we went into this one cabin of Billy's dad, and in this particular cabin, there were bear skins, pickled butter, several mallards in brine, and he had dried beans and flour, things like this. And he had starter for sourdough bread, and several guns and ammunition. So we holed up there during the storm. About the 6th day of the storm, it abated just a little, so we went out and picked the bodies up off the beach and buried them in a temporary grave till the weather could clear. Then we sat back and waited. So they bury the bodies during the storm, then wait in this hole in the ground eating pickled butter for 6 days. Finally, storm breaks. But they're almost out of pickled butter. They need fresh food. And they can see caribou in the hills, so they hike several miles inland hunting caribou. And here's where Grandpa is going to reach his low point. He hasn't reached it yet. But while they're hunting in the hills, they notice planes circling back at the beach. Aha! They're rescued! Only they're not on the beach. Grandpa. We noticed about 25 to 30 planes buzzing the beach, and we couldn't understand what it was. I took my jacket off and was waving. We were all waving, and we shot a couple of extra shots in the air in the hope that they would see us. But we were too far off the beach. And they were not looking for anything in the interior. They were looking along the beach. We found out later that they'd sent these people to find out if they needed to send another burial party. And when they got there, they found that the beach was clean, and they surmised that the storm was so severe that all the bodies had been washed out to sea. So they just forgot about all of us, and they closed the case, and they did not send my wife a notice that I was missing. That's the low point, right? Imagine seeing those planes in the distance. You spent 12 days near the beach. You finally head inland looking for food, and in that moment, you miss your rescue. Those planes were looking for bodies, but obviously, seeing 3 guys jumping up and down on the beach, they would have switched it to a rescue mission. But it didn't happen. And here is my favorite paragraph in Grandpa's story. I love every word of this passage. It's so absurd, it feels somehow darkly comedic. Well, to make a long story short, we waited a couple of days. Nobody showed up again. So we decided we'd better try to do something. And Billy said his dad had to walk back to a place called King Cove, which was roughly 140 miles through the Pinnacles and the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, past some volcanoes and so on in that particular area. So he said he thought he knew the way. His dad had caught his hand in a bear trap, and he had to go back for medical treatment. What? I have so many questions. First of all of those awesome place names exist. There is indeed a place called the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, and King Cove is very close to Cold Bay. I love that they're preparing to hike 140 miles through terrible conditions because Billy, quote, thought he knew the way. Like, oh man. I probably would have been like, why don't we try this beach thing for another few days, huh? Why don't we sit here for a while? And why is it up to Billy to find the way? Because, of course, as you do, Billy's dad got his hand caught in a bear trap. What? It just shows you how far removed they are from the amenities that we take for granted. My hand's caught in a bear trap. Well, we better start hiking that 140 miles to the hospital. So at this point, if I told you Grandpa survived this ordeal, he did, that would be enough of a story, right? It feels like a movie, like an Alaskan Castaway. But this story's got one more awesome twist, puts it over the top. Grandpa Rice, take it home. It was just 36 days later, after wearing out our shoes and each taking bear skin and making mucklucks out of them so we could walk, we came into Cold Bay. And as we walked into the camp area, we were heading toward the mess hall, yeah, I'll bet, a young soldier came by, and I recognized him as my assistant. And here I was, greasy and dirty, with these funny-looking mucklucks on and whiskers down to my chest. And I'd lost, I would say, 30 pounds or more. Anyhow, I asked him if he didn't know me. And then he recognized my voice and he said, "Chaplain Rice? It can't be. You're dead." So after he convinces his assistant that he's not dead, they continue on to the mess hall. We used to have our services in the mess hall, and there was a Catholic chaplain at the base who came up with me and was conducting services while I was away. And as we got close to the mess hall, I saw it was full. The sides were bulging out. And we got to the door and the kid yelled, "Look who's here! Here's Chaplain Rice!" Well, after the clapping had died down and some of the yelling had stopped, I found out they were preparing to have a memorial service for me and the two men who supposedly were lost at sea. And that was quite an experience. Yep, Grandpa Rice attended his own funeral. Bang! I told you the story was bonkers. Grandpa Rice walked in on his own memorial service like he was back from the dead. He probably looked like zombie Grandpa. I mean, it's such an inspiring tale of three people coming together to survive. 36 days. And my eternal thanks to Billy and his dad. Heroes, without whom Grandpa Rice wouldn't have stood a chance. And I wonder what Grandma must have thought when she learned, finally, that her husband was in fact alive. It's difficult to take it all in, to think of it not in movie terms, but as something that really happened to a family member of mine. The footnote of this story is that after serving 30 months in Alaska, Grandpa Rice was given the choice of going back to Alaska for another 2 years or being transferred to another theater of operation. I mean, having recently endured a 36-day near-death experience, he probably thought, how bad could the next assignment be? Cut to Grandpa on a glider over France. As Grandpa put it, I decided to take my chances going somewhere else. Perhaps that was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. But that can be neither here nor there. Amazing. Anyway, so we come to the end of another installment of Dork Tales, a woo-woo. Grandpa Rice, the man who attended his own funeral. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.